topic is trauma-transformative foresight. And together, we'll be reconciling the past, re-engaging the present, and reimagining our future. How do you define trauma-transformative foresight?
Holistic healing journey that begins the reconciliation of the past, so that's kind of the first part, a re-engagement with the present, and a reimagining of the future.
What impact does trauma-transformative foresight have on young people's ability to participate effectively in decision-making spaces?
In that development process, these boys become incredibly prone for violence. Where are you going to be in 10 years? And these youth often will say, I don't even think I'll probably be alive in 10 years.
How does this unresolved trauma influence an individual, or specifically a youth's ability to engage in futures thinking?
Their head is up, their voice, the young girls are speaking, they're engaging. So in 12 weeks.
So how does this really occur? What teaching methods are used to heal previous trauma? Welcome to Beyond Tomorrow, Navigating Frontiers, the podcast where we explore different futures through the eyes of experts in various fields. Today, we are here at the Dubai Future Forum. I'm your host, Vrishank Sai Anand, and together we'll journey into the realms of innovation, foresight, and visionary thinking, uncovering how today's pioneers are actively shaping our world of tomorrow. In each episode, we bring to you thought leaders, change makers, and visionaries who are at the cutting edge of their respective domains. Through insightful conversations, we aim to inspire, educate, and challenge our listeners to think beyond the present and navigate the frontiers of what lies ahead. Today, we have with us a very special guest, Dr. Stephen Lichty, who is a founder and managing partner of Real Consulting Group, a boutique firm focused on foresight, research, and evaluation in Nairobi, Kenya. He has over 25 years of experience in various sectors across Africa, Asia, Europe, and Latin America, including those in post-conflict, transitional, and fragile environments. He works with transformative foresight, futures thinking, systems mapping, and many other qualitative methods. He was a Rotary Peace Fellow and Futures Fellow with the Association of Professional Futurists. Stephen has a PhD in African Studies, where his doctoral research examined religious pedagogies of political socialization in Kenya. He also has an MPhil in Future Studies from Stellenbosch University. Stephen is currently focused on the nexus of healing-centered well-being programs among marginalized groups and its long-term impact on the WHO's concept of the triple dividend. Today's topic is trauma-transformative foresight, and together we'll be reconciling the past, re-engaging the present, and reimagining our future. Welcome to the podcast, Stephen.
Thank you, Vrishank. It's an honor to be here.
So I'd like to start with this question. Just tell me a bit about your work at the intersection of trauma-transformative foresight and a bit of talk about marginalized communities.
So I live in Nairobi, Kenya, and work with various sort of communities. It was part of my original MPhil research, and we were looking at how healing-centered, community initiative, youth-led sort of programming in the coastal regions of Kenya, working with specifically communities that have been prone to violence, some of the members coming out of Al-Shabaab, terrorist organization, as well as gang violence out of Mombasa. And so combined with the violent sort of background, they're also coming from just extreme sort of poverty. So what we were looking at and what we've been exploring is how these healing-centered oriented programming actually shifts a lot of their mindset and moves them from what we're kind of calling a state of futures unconsciousness to a greater state of futures consciousness. So that's kind of the genesis of a trauma-transformative sort of foresight that we're using in this setting.
Could you break it down a bit? I mean, how do you define trauma-transformative foresight?
So I've actually written down my definition so that it is clear and concise, and this is the definition that we're currently working with. It's a a process and is constantly being redefined and so forth. But at the moment, we're calling it the process of engaging with futures and foresight, both formally and informally, through neurobiological lenses facilitated by a holistic healing journey that begins the reconciliation of the past. So that's kind of the first part, a re-engagement with the present and a reimagining of the future. So there's an element that it's more than just foresight. And this is, and we can maybe talk about this a little bit later, related to our Ustawi scale of engagement, USE. And this is kind of capturing how we're measuring and assessing this. So it is foresight, but there also includes element of the past and the present.
So the DFF is currently in its third year, and I think it's amazing to see different organizations like Teach the Future and UNICEF promoting youth representation. In your research, I'd like to know what impact does trauma transformative foresight have on young people's ability to participate effectively in decision making spaces?
Yeah, so Teach the Future, people like Lisa Giuliani and UNICEF with John Sweeney and Adam Sharp and so forth are important sort of spaces where they're really bringing resources into some amazing sort of communities. The exhibit on level 1, I believe, where UNICEF is talking about the future of children and so forth, and they've built these scenarios. I just was up there touring it with Adam, and so to me, when we think about the future of children, you're obviously going to have your elite children coming from incredibly wealthy homes, and I won't say any more about that, but let's say more upper middle class sort of children. I know you, I know your parents, I know how you've been raised in this amazing sort of home and so forth. So many children that do not have that, and it's millions of children that are in this place. But these kids are bright, they're energetic. When we look at human development and how the brain develops, there's like this crucial age of especially young boys moving into manhood and so forth, where neurobiologically so much is happening in their brain. Well, if that gets short circuited or truncated in that development process, these boys become incredibly prone for violence and really kind of a downhill life from that. So this is why actually the World Health Organization is saying, wait a second, we actually need to invest in adolescence because it's such a crucial time for brain development. And this is where their concept of the triple dividend, as you mentioned in the introduction, comes from, where they're saying investing in adolescence, you get a dividend immediately because boys and girls stay in school longer, they live healthier lives, make better choices. That investment, that return, you get a second dividend when we become adults. 20 years later, they're taking that skill set, living better lives as an adult. And then the third dividend arrives when they marry and have their own children. So as parents, they don't necessarily repeat maybe the same errors and mistakes that their parents did. So it really, the triple dividend in and of itself by the World Health Organization is very much a foresight-oriented programming. And then you have entities like UNICEF, Teach the Future, and so forth coming along and really helping build capacity. And UNICEF isn't just working; they're working across the board in the scenarios that the latest report and work that UNICEF has been doing talks about these three sort of scenarios. So a lot of overlap in that area.
I think some of these developmental issues in children stem out of the fact that young people are often the last to be included in conversations about their own future. So, how can the framework of trauma transformative foresight ensure that their voices are not just heard, but integrated into the process of shaping tomorrow and shaping their lives?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I think, one of the insight that I gained from working with these youth, so I was primarily working with 18 and above, just because from a institutional review board sort of process, it's easier to work with 18 and above. But our programming, we have a programming for Vijana, which is youth in Swahili, and Watoto, which is children in Swahili. And so we're actually working with this age group. But these youth, I asked them, I said, what is one of the biggest challenges that you face? And they actually said intergenerational communication. So they intuitively know that they have a lot of insight and wisdom and so forth. And culturally, it's just very difficult to bring change in community where culturally a lot of the gatekeepers for change are actually the elder members in society and so forth. But I think there's going to be a momentum across Africa when we look at the youth bulge on the continent. We're going to see more and more momentum where youth really want to have a voice. But on the flip side of that, I have been in youth settings where I've challenged them. I'm like, when you get the platform, when you get the opportunity to speak into government, into business, you need to have your ducks in a row, so to speak. You need to be ready to do this because some youth actually squander that sort of opportunity. So it kind of goes both ways. But I think here's where foresight is such a powerful tool because it enables you to put on a framework, do the analysis, do a causal layered analysis, do a futures triangle, things that youth can really kind of grasp. And if that's incorporated in with the work that they're doing with foresight, they can actually have a very coherent kind of strategic foresight, and their voice is framed in a way that governments, businesses, civil society organizations can understand. So we're actually kind of in the process of exploring how do we provide the spaces for the youth to do that. So in many ways, right now, they've really worked hard with reconciling the past through this kind of 12-week healing-centered sort of programming. Now we're kind of like, wow, these youth are on fire. They're engaged. They understand systems. They understand critical thinking. They understand the role of colonial trauma, communal trauma, and so forth, and they want to move forward. So yeah, looking forward to partnering with organizations like UNICEF and Teach the Future and so forth of really empowering these youth to kind of what's next and go from there.
Wow, that's amazing. I think coming back to the topic of trauma transformative foresight, how does this unresolved trauma influence an individual or specifically a youth's ability to engage in futures thinking, a field that is developing in our present? And what are the broader implications of this on marginalized communities? I know you have a lot of experience in that field, and I mean, maybe even in Kenya and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, so I've worked in the development field since I don't know when, 94, 95, something like that, and have been working in Africa since 97. Um, so I say that because when we think of development, long-term development, systems, structures, and so forth, we have to put it on minimum 10-year timeframes, 10, 20 years. So it's really long-term. But what is exciting about this programming is you can take despondent youth who, and I was there at the beginning of the programming and I was there at the end, and because I'm kind of situated here and can't adjust my position, but think of a downtrodden, their head is down and they don't look up, and their level of agency, their level of understanding, it's palpable. You can see it. And through this 12-week sort of journey, they're sitting upright. Their head is up. Their voice, the young girls are speaking. They're engaging. So in 12 weeks, you've seen a significant sort of change. And it's obviously it's individual, but I think one of the most powerful things that we're doing is we're doing it from an African perspective, an African indigenous sort of grounding that is communal in orientation. Yesterday, I was in the panel and we were talking about space for grief and how many societies don't know how to grieve. And we take it personally, we put it individually. For many of these individuals, these young boys and girls, they've actually had horrendous childhoods. We use the adverse childhood experience scale, a scale of 1 to 10. So every horrible thing that you can think of that could happen to a child, you're a 10. But most people, our average was around 4 or 5, but people would have 7 or 8. And we know from long-term research that if you have like 6 or more, this is mostly in the United States, 6 or more of these, your lifespan is cut by 20 years. 20 years. because of these sort of experiences. So what we're doing is this kind of almost surgical intervention to reconcile those sort of things so that they can be living a healthier life um, at a much younger age. So I'm not sure if that got exactly at your question, but that's where I've veered.
It's inspiring to hear how trauma transformative foresight can really, I mean, change a child's, perspective. So, how does this really occur? What teaching methods are used to heal previous trauma?
I mean, we so I think one of the most amazing things, like I love Lego serious play. So, these people that have this amazing kit of Lego and they come in, but I know what would happen to that set in the Kenyan setting. You would have no Lego left at the end of the event. It would all go missing. So we use rocks, leaves, and stones, which you can find in any village. And we have every individual tell their story. Rocks represent the hard places in life. The leaves represent the beautiful parts in their life. And the sticks are the connecting stories. So every person is allowed to share their story, and they're sharing it in a group of 6 to 10 peers. What we're finding is that sharing, that part of grieving their past, hearing their story, opens up this space for camaraderie and finding out, oh, that experience happened to me. Oh, my neighbor who I did not know also experienced that. So it really builds a social glue that enables the sustainability of this. We don't have to worry about sustainability of this. It just naturally happens because we're connecting people with each other. And then that just, the social capital that arises from that just goes from there.
Could you elaborate a bit on the continuum from future's unconsciousness to future's consciousness and how it intersects with the entire trauma healing process?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I actually had to take notes on that as well so that I would get these correct. So the University of Turku several years ago has developed what they call the Futures Consciousness Scale, and this is actually an amazing tool. They have validated it. The rigor of the tool is amazing, but they are very open and upfront, saying that it is very individualistic in its orientation, and it kind of has a Western sort of understanding. So I'll mention this. I think this is related to the idea of Ustawi, but essentially the future consciousness scale is 5 dimensions. It's agency beliefs. How empowered are you? It's
Right.
concern for others. So kind of that engagement to others. It's openness to alternatives. So this is challenging kind of getting in a rut thinking, but thinking of other alternatives. And then there's systems perceptions, like you understand that your community is a system, that the government is a system, that even your body, we know is a system, but you within your community is a system. And then finally, a time perspective, like a horizon and so forth. So what they are using to assess what is your level of future consciousness. I think there's 5 areas and 8 questions per dimension. So that's a 40 question survey that you do. But what we're playing around with is the idea that you can actually have the inverse of that. And this is what we're finding, that many of the youth are actually in a state of futures unconsciousness. And so that is just simply the inverse of that. So you're disempowered. You're self-protective and you project your anger inside you. You're not concerned about others. You're risk adverse. You just stay in this destructive path because you're too scared of to move beyond that. It's closed loop thinking. It's time trapped. You're caught in this sort of warp, and so we're trying to develop some way of assessing how do youth move from a state of futures unconsciousness, which is really the trauma oriented part. And so the trauma transformative foresight is helping them project and understand a desired future for themselves and for their community that aligns more with those elements of the future consciousness scale.
So, how exactly does trauma transformative foresight align with the concept that you mentioned earlier, the triple dividend? And what potential, as you mentioned, does it hold for transforming youth development outcomes in Africa?
So the triple dividend as a concept was kind of coined. The term was coined in 2016, um, and again, it kind of goes back to historically the idea that a lot of the development sort of systems and organizations and so forth really were focused on child mortality, cutting that rate. So we focused on children 5 and under, and then we were focusing on youth. So we kind of jumped to 18 and above. And there was just kind of this understanding, I think, in the 70s and 80s, and I think even into the 90s, that, oh, adolescent boys are the most resilient. So someone like you are the most resilient in the community. And yes, maybe so, but what we kind of didn't bring in was the neurobiological mental health side of that, saying that the development changes happening in adolescence in this period is really, really important. So the triple dividend was this idea we do need to invest in adolescence. But so much of the mental health programming is still coming from what we term a biomedical sort of approach. So the World Health Organization, again, has like a pyramid, and at the top is this very specialized medical care that is incredibly expensive. This is like visiting a psychologist, visiting a psychiatrist. If I'm working with 1 million of those, and in Kenya, to my knowledge, we have 2 child psychologists in a country of 55 million. So how do you see 20? I need to see 25 million patients this year. So it just doesn't work. But at the bottom of this pyramid is this idea of communal health. And this is where we're focused on, is this communal mental health programming. And the World Health Organization is also maybe focused a little bit more on, say, physical health. And so what we're doing is adding this module and this focus on, yes, hygiene, nutrition, these sort of elements are important, but so is the mental well-being and the mental support for youth during this period. So trauma-transformative foresight is maybe more of a concept and a tool, but the programming that we have developed to lead these sort of interventions is really infused with that trauma-transformative foresight.
You mentioned communal health. I mean, how can this idea of communal health spread throughout the world?
Okay, so let's just start local. So what happened when we've trained approximately, I think, 700 youth, um, and this is what I knew at least 2 years ago. What happened was, and this kind of relates to sustainability and scalability. These youth were on fire. These youth wanted to change their community. These youth said, we feel like we're the last vanguards of Swahili culture. So this is kind of the traditional culture on the coast of Kenya. And they're like, we want to make our communities more livable. That energy, teachers were asking, what happened? Parents were saying, what happened to my child? What did you do? All of a sudden, they were more mindful. They were more respectful. They were just more engaged. And I mean, this isn't some elixir. It isn't a magic switch. But over this journey, parents were seeing these changes. Well, then the county government came to some of these youth and said, can you bring this into our prisons in Kwale County? And so now these youth were taking their experience and taking it into the prison system. The schools, the local schools want to see it. So it has a ripple effect in the community, but the opportunity to use this in South Sudan, in Ethiopia, in Somalia, all of these places is immense. And, I think we're getting some of this material translated into Ukrainian, because we know that in the last couple of years, there's been an entire generation of Ukrainian children that have had their education system disrupted and so forth. And the entire country of Ukraine is experiencing, forms of trauma, as are the Russians who are caught in this sort of system as well. So the ability to translate the curriculum and so forth it's actually it's not light touch mental health. It really, because it's 12 weeks long and you're meeting every week for like 3 or 4 hours in small groups, it's intense, but it doesn't require multi-million-dollar sort of interventions. So I think the potential for it to be picked up in various parts of the world is great and would be really beneficial, especially if we look at what's maybe coming down the line. Climate change, conflict, economic chaos, all these sort of things. The current 10-year-old, the current 5-year-old might very well be in some precarious predicaments here in the future.
What role do you believe youth play in trauma transformative foresight?
They are 100% and at the center of this, in the sense that they're the living, breathing embodiment of that sort of process. So we talk about in development, we talk about key performance indicators. How many children did this? How many did that? It's more like, I don't want to use those. I want to use living, breathing, young men and women who have their life has been transformed and have been changed. Those are the stories. Those are the examples, of what this can bring.
Could you tell me a bit more about the topic of the idea of the Utsawi state of engagement you'd mentioned a bit earlier?
Yeah, so I think I kind of met. So this is related to the future consciousness
Yes.
scale. So one of the critiques we are wrestling with and trying to find powerful ways of modifying that. So just the two words of future consciousness scale. Futures already put you on some sort of idea that we're talking about the futures, and consciousness is very much a cognitive, head oriented. So we're looking at kind of a three-dimensional model, in the sense that we want to look at time from past, present, and future, because they really are wrestling with the past. So a lot of foresight work, we talk about the past a little bit, but this really is going in and reconciling the past. Then we're re-engaging with the present, and then we are reimagining. These youth are reimagining their future from a completely different perspective than they were prior to the interventions. And then the second element of that is using a 3H model. So 3H means head, heart, hands. So we have futures thinking, but there's also future feeling, and there's future doing. Your thinking, our head, heart, and hands are always integrated. And so what we're trying to understand is, how are you feeling about the future? So what we're building out a completely different sort of scale, and this is the Ustawi scale of engagement USE use, that is understanding how they are thinking about the future, but also how they're feeling.
So, is future feeling a part of future thinking? Like a
I I
subpart?
I think it's all integrated, but because futures thinking, we just
Right.
generally cognitively always think that it's oh, because a lot of who was it? I think there was a dinner. I'm looking at the audience here. I think there
Yeah.
was a dinner Monday night that was an exploratory sort of thing, where there were smells and other senses. And I know, like, even tomorrow, APF is doing a workshop, and they're exploring with other sensory ways of understanding the future. So we're not doing anything really crazy or wild here. There's other organizations understanding this, but do you like? If people would ask me, how do you feel about the future? My personal future, I'm very optimistic. I'm excited, but there's other people who have great angst. And even asking some of these youth, and I've done this in other sort of setting with other communities. I've said, where are you going to be in 10 years? And these youth often will say, I don't even think I'll probably be alive in 10 years. So that's not, I don't think any of us in this room, we think, oh, I don't think I'm sure I'll be around in 10 years. But for some of these youth, they know that the violence that they're living in cuts their life short prematurely.
So, before we end, if you could give any piece of advice to youth out there, what would it be?
Find a optimistic futurist, and but no, I mean, I think there's a lot of youth who do live in very despondent sort of situations, and yeah, don't give up. I'm really thinking of some of the more desperate sort of situations for youth, um, but find that support. And so And then maybe to just add to that, my advice to the foresight community is we just have to be cognizant of the mental state and the fragility of not just youth, but of their parents and of their grandparents. And it is very multi-generational,
Again,
intergenerational sort
relating
of
back to
focus.
the triple
Yeah.
dividend.
Relating back to we're living the triple
Yeah.
dividend all the
Yeah.
time, but if we can intervene and bring that change along the process, even better.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for sharing
You're
your insights
welcome.
and experiences with us today. It's been an enlightening conversation on trauma transformative foresight, and I'm sure our listeners have gained a lot from it. To everyone tuning in, thank you so much, and keep and stay posted. And thank you for joining us on Beyond Tomorrow Navigating Frontiers. Until next time.